Good evening, everyone. I'm sorry that we can't be together in person today, but I'm grateful for the opportunity to join this discussion virtually and to offer some brief remarks. This month, we are commemorating the 100th anniversary of the ratification of the 19th Amendment. The amendment was the result of determined activism by women across the country. But the equality promised by the 19th Amendment was profoundly incomplete, applying only to white women. For Black women, the struggle for the ballot didn't end in 1920. While this year marks the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, it has been only 55 years since the passage of the Voting Rights Act, which outlawed many of the racist poll taxes, literacy tests, and other policies that denied people of color the right to vote. And now, a half century later, key tenets of the Voting Rights Act have been stripped away, gutted, and we find ourselves engaged in a daily struggle to prevent systemic voter suppression, intimidation, disinformation, and the disenfranchisement of millions of Black and Brown Americans. The struggle for full and equal voting rights is part and parcel of this struggle to rectify the legacy of systemic racism and institutionalized oppression, which has created deeply entrenched disparities and inequities in our communities. Now more than ever, it is vital that we elect leaders who reflect the lived experiences of the people they serve, who will legislate our values, and who will fight for economic, healthcare, education, transit, and environmental justice. But so long as systemic barriers create inequitable access to the ballot box, full and fair representation will remain out of reach. We must honor the legacy of the trailblazing Black women who stood up and reached for the ballot by continuing to defend the right they fought so hard for. Congress must pass H.R. 1 to expand access to the ballot box, and H.R. 4 must be renamed for John Lewis and brought to the floor for a vote to restore the full strength of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And we must stand up in the face of ongoing efforts to enact racist, discriminatory policies that would disenfranchise entire communities. Speaking of the trailblazing Black women for whom we owe a debt to, I want to thank a shero of mine, a trailblazer in her own right, an unyielding champion for justice, City Councilor Denise Simmons. Thank you for organizing this important conversation. Thank you to all of you for participating and being here tonight. Together, we must continue to organize in our own communities to advance the work begun generations ago, to preserve and to expand the right to vote for everyone in our communities.
Good evening, and thank all of you for joining us this evening as we have this conversation. I just want to thank Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley for her opening remarks. She has really set the stage for our conversation. You know, I think of her, I am honored by her presence, and I always wish her the best because I know her job is all uphill. You know, this evening, not only are we going to talk a little bit about women's suffrage, but I think we'll have an opportunity to just talk about the role of Black women in our community. You know, I have the pleasure of co-moderating a program with my sister friend and colleague, Manikka Bowman, who you'll hear from shortly. But we have a powerhouse panel this evening as we commemorate the 100th anniversary of 100 years of women's suffrage of the 19th Amendment. Now you'll notice, I did not say celebrate. This is not a party, and it's never really been a party for Black women when it talks about the struggle. But it's an opportunity for us to have a conversation amongst ourselves and with others to talk about the experiences of Black women, voting rights, and women's suffrage. In just a moment, I'm going to introduce our panelists. But I just wanted to say this is also another important day. It is Black Women's Equal Pay Day. Today, Black women will have their salaries will have equaled white male salaries of 2019. Today, it is August 13th. And it just speaks to the struggle that still continues, that Black women Latino women, even more so, and Asian women still are last in line when it comes to equity. You know, but it's also important because just 2 days ago, we all witnessed the announcement where what they call presumptive nominee, Joe Biden, chose Kamala Harris to be the first woman of color to be placed on a national ticket as the vice presidential candidate. So tonight's panel discussion of 100 years of women's suffrage, 45 years of waiting, is an recognition not only of what we've experienced just recently around Kamala Harris, but what we have struggled for so long, to talk about those 45 years, because we all know that it wasn't until the Voting Rights Act of 1965 that women, Black women, would have that shared opportunity. You know, for so long, politicians have ignored women, particularly Black women. And I say ignored us at their own peril. When I think of community activism, when I think about grassroots organizing, Black women come to mind, the Fannie Lou Hamers, the Sojourner Truths, the Harriet Tubmans, the Mumbets, but not that far away, even Melania Cass, the Sandra Graham. Sandra Graham was the very first woman to sit on the Cambridge City Council. And please understand that they have blazed a trail for us, and thank goodness for them. The other reason why we're having this event this evening is my co-conspirators, I often call us, you know, what did John Lewis say, the people that I get in good trouble with. We had a program that we would run every year called Trailblazing Women. And Trailblazing Women was an opportunity for us. It was the YWCA, the Women's Commission, the mayors. I started this when I was the mayor, so the city council, the city manager, and the mass humanities would come together to have an event where we would honor trailblazers, mostly Black and brown women who are laboring in the community, doing good work, getting involved in good trouble, but rarely we get recognized. And this year, it was our plan that we would acknowledge these women in the context of women's suffrage. Let's have a conversation about Black women in the vote and organizing. And then COVID-19 came. And we sort of shelved it. We said, well, you know, we can't take a chance bringing these people together to have this conversation. We don't put anyone in danger. But as I watched the programs of celebrating women's suffrage and Stanton and Anthony and Paul, and then the side remarks about, and we didn't do right by Black women. I said, let's have that conversation. We can still have that conversation. We'll have to do it new. We'll have to do it different. We're going to do it as Black women do, make a way when there's no way. And so I thank you, each of you, for being here, joining me this evening, as we had this kitchen table conversation about Black women, suffrage, and what it all means to all of us. With that, let me introduce and ask for a few words from my, as I said, co-conspirator, co-moderator when it comes to being in good trouble, Manikka Bowman. Manikka?
Thank you, Denise. And I have to say, when I saw the lineup for tonight's show, I decided that I needed to straighten my back up a little bit because of all the dynamic women and the powerhouse for each and every woman in her own right. And it's just a privilege and an honor to center our own stories. So often, whether it's in the workplace, whether it's in public life, the ability to be able to have a frank conversation about where women of color fit into feminism, fit into the women's suffrage movement, is often pushed to the side because we don't want to ruffle too many feathers or make white women, quite frankly, feel uncomfortable. But the reality is that our experience and our liberty and our ability to access voting rights is a different narrative and it's a different story. So I'm excited to be a part of this conversation. I'm elated that we're having it after the announcement of soon to be Vice President Kamala Harris. My daughter and I, we've been singing Kamala, Kamala all throughout the house. So I'm elated and I'm ready to have the conversation. So let's get to it.
Thank you, Manikka. As I mentioned earlier, this program is co-sponsored, is hosted by CCTV, of which we owe a debt of gratitude. Susan Fleischman and John Eiffel and Maritza rooms. But we also have the support and help of the Cambridge YWCA, which is led by our executive director, Eva Martin Blythe. And I want to give her a moment to open up our talk by giving some introductory remarks before we go into panelist introductions and into the conversation. So Eva, welcome.
Thank you, Councilor Simmons. And it's really my pleasure to be here among what I have come to think about as a diverse, outstanding, informed, and important group of women who have important things to say about the women's suffrage movement and about the women's movement and about Black women's movements. The YWCA in Cambridge actually was founded in 1891. Came to be as an entity at 7 Temple Street in 1911 rather. And over those last years, we've grown to be an association whose mission is the elimination of racism and the empowerment of women. And with that having said, it's critical, it's important for us as an organization to play a significant role wherever we can and wherever we can insert ourselves or be invited to have a discussion about the elimination of racism and the empowerment of women. And that discussion has to include conversation about the suffrage movement. You know, in 1920, Ida B. Wells was told to go to the back of the parade with all the other Black women, and she simply said, "I'm not doing it. I'm not going back there." And she went to the middle of the parade and marched with her delegation from Illinois. You know, some 35 years later, Rosa Parks said, "I'm not going to the back of the bus." We continue to say we are not going to be second-class citizens. We're not going to be mistreated. We're not going to be looked at as lesser than. And then in 1964, the amazing Fannie Lou Hamer, a Mississippi sharecropper who had a blood clot behind her eye from being beat in jail in Mississippi, took the Democratic Convention to its knees, brought the convention to its knees with her Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, who came to unseat the very white, very segregationist delegation that had come from Mississippi to represent that state as part of the Democratic election process. And then a year later, we actually found ourselves having the passage of the Voting Rights Act. You know, there's been a long and tumultuous history between women and civic engagement, Black women and civic engagement, Black women and white women and civic engagement. And we know that one of the reasons why Black women were not, one of many reasons why Black women weren't included in the very first suffrage movement, very early suffrage movement, was it was expedient not to have us there, for starters, but there was also a strong rooting of white supremacy in the suffrage movement. We don't hear a lot about that. You know, there's not a lot of talk about that part of the women's suffrage movement, but there was a very, very strong white supremacist arm, philosophy, way of thinking, whatever you want to call it, in the suffrage movement, which caused us then to be invited, told, sent, but none of which we abided by, to the back of the parade. You know, now we see that women are voting in higher numbers. We see that more women, case in point, are vice presidential candidate, but more women are seeking public office more than ever before. More women of color are seeking public office. More Black women are seeking public office. It's very intentional. We have to be engaged. We have to be informed. We have to be involved. The 116th Congress has more women in it than any other Congress in history. We can't ignore that. That didn't happen by accident. That happened because Black women have been out there on the forefront, fighting for the right to vote, fighting for the right to be elected, fighting for our own dignity, our own self-worth that we know about already, but we have to impress upon other people that they need to know it too. The YWCA we're not without fault. Let me not sit here and suggest that the YWCA has been on the good foot from day one. That is not the case by any stretch of the imagination. And we're working to change our own history. with the passage of what was called the One Imperative about 40 years ago, the Digest version of which was the elimination of racism by any means necessary, there were actually YWCAs who left the movement, who simply said, I'm not going to be part of that, I'm not going to do it, I'm not going to be a YWCA anymore. So those of us who remain hopefully committed, hopefully involved, hopefully engaged in civic involvement and true to the cause of Black women, women of color. And it's with that thought in mind, and I'm just very privileged to be part of this event this evening, that the YWCA in Cambridge has been invited and is a co-sponsor for this evening. And thank you, and I'm looking forward to tonight's discussion.
Thank you, Eva. Thank you for those introductory remarks. So let's begin by introducing who we have with us, our speakers, and then we will start our conversation. And I say conversation because I do want us to be interactive with one another. We'll also have some questions from our chat. So if those that are tuning in, please use that Q&A, not the chat, I'm sorry, the Q&A to ask any questions, and we'll try to get as many of those onto the floor. Our panelists. This evening we have Dr. Kenvi Phillips. Dr. Phillips is the first curator for race and ethnicity at the Schlesinger Library of Harvard Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study. There she works to increase the collections and amplify the stories of local and nationally known women of color. Dr. Phillips holds a master's in public history, a doctorate in U.S. history from Harvard University, and prior to coming to the Schlesinger, she worked at the Mary McLeod Bethune House in Washington, D.C. Most recently, she served as assistant curator for manuscripts and librarian for prints and photographs at Howard's internationally renowned Moreland Spingarn Research Center. Also with us this evening is Suffolk County District Attorney Rachael Rollins. Suffolk County District Attorney Rollins is the Chief Law Enforcement Officer for Boston, Chelsea, Revere, and Winthrop, Massachusetts. I like saying the chief. She is the first woman ever elected as district attorney in Suffolk County, the first woman of color ever elected to serve in this role in Massachusetts. We might want to talk a little bit about what that means to be the first. Originally from Cambridge, we forgot to give you your Just a Kid from Cambridge badge. D.A. Rollins served as an attorney for over 20 years, previously working as a field attorney with the National Labor Relations Board and as an associate of a law firm, Bingham McCutcheon, and as the federal prosecutor at the United States Attorney Office in Boston, among other distinguished roles. Another distinguished member of our panelists this evening is my co-conspirator, Manikka Bowman. Vice chair of the school committee, she received her bachelor's degree from a historically Black Bethune-Cookman University in Daytona Beach, Florida. She moved on to Atlanta to complete her dual master's degree in divinity and urban policy from Columbia Theological Seminary and Georgia State University. She's been an ordained clergywoman in the African American Episcopal tradition for 15 years, and she's currently serving her third term on the Cambridge School Committee. And I have to also mention again, she is the co-moderator of a program we do together called COVID-19 in the Black community that which we've been running since May. I'm very excited also to have us with us, Charlotte Golar Richie. Currently serving as the Distinguished Public Service Fellow at UMass Boston Center for Women in Politics and Public Policy. She is an experienced leader and administrator with a background in public service and political activism. A deeply held commitment to civil rights with her election to the Massachusetts House of Representatives in 1994. She was only the 7th Black woman to be elected to the House, the 7th. I admire how you did it, but it must have been very interesting being a few in that number. The Reverend Irene Monroe, co-host of WGBH's 89.7's All Revved Up. This program is on Boston's NPR affiliate. She's a visiting scholar in the Religion and Conflict Transformation program at Boston University School of Theology, and the Boston Voice for Detours African American Heritage Trail. Reverend Monroe's syndicated religious column appears in the Bay Windows, the Cambridge Chronicle, Dig Boston, and in several papers and magazines in cities across the country and in the UK and Canada. And I am very honored to call her my dear friend. And then also with us, and I'm really excited, Wilnelia Rivera, president and founder of Rivera Consulting, political strategist, urban planner, project management professional, from her early career as union organizer to working to help elect dozens of political candidates to political office, ushering in a new era of criminal justice reform with the Commonwealth Corey Coalition, to serving on Governor Patrick's senior staff as the Director of External Affairs. Wilnelia continues to be a dynamic change-making force in Massachusetts and beyond. If we were live and we had an audience, there would be a groundswell of applause for this wonderful compilation of wonderful women that are here with us this evening. I just want to thank each of you for taking the time to be with us tonight to have this conversation about Black women, Black women's suffrage, Black women in the community. And I don't mind if we talk a little bit about Kamala Harris. But while we get started, I want to start our conversation with you, Dr. Phillips. Throughout history, Black women have tended to be the engine, the driving force of social change and movements toward expanding civil rights. And I know as a historian, you have studied Black women, Black women's historical role from laying the groundwork of the 19th Amendment and more broadly in society over the years. Before we had the Voting Rights Act that became the law of the land. From your perspective as a historian, can you talk to us a little bit, give us historical perspective about Black women, Black women's roles?
Oh, thank you so much, Denise. I want to say I'm honored and inspired by this lineup of panelists. You all are so awesome. You make me want to be better, do better, and do greater. Thank you for all that you do. Thank you for putting this panel together. And to get into the conversation, a lot of the points that I wanted to make have already been made, but I want, as a person who works in an archival repository, I wanted to talk about very briefly, like the idea that we just named several women over the course of time, starting in the 18th century with Elizabeth Freeman, who sued for her freedom right here in the state of Massachusetts, which set a precedent for not just her, but other Black women, but for Black men as well, to be able to gain their freedom. And when we're talking about, as Congresswoman Pressley said, not just suffrage and freedom and voting, but equality. So how do we get equality, full citizenship? How do we are able to express ourselves and have access to the rights that we're granted? And even how do we fight to get those rights that we're not granted? We have a long arc of doing that in this country as Black women, like I said, starting even before the 18th century, but Elizabeth Freeman is a great place to start. We can move on and talk a little bit about Anna Douglas. We talk about our favorite suffragists. One of our favorite suffragists is Frederick Douglass, who was an abolitionist, a speaker, a freedom fighter, but his wife, his first wife, Anna Douglas, who was illiterate, but was largely responsible for helping him to get his freedom so that he could do and be the champion that he was for us all. We can credit that with his wife. So even in terms of us thinking that individual act, as Elizabeth Freeman committed, the supportive role that Anna Douglas committed, then we can go on to the rallying cry of a Sojourner Truth or Harriet Tubman, who we know more about here recently because of the recent film, and also the push to get her on our currency, because it makes no sense that we're not represented in every facet of life. We can move forward to another generation of Black women. There was a fight for reparations immediately after the Civil War that was led by a woman by the name of Callie House. We don't talk about like the seeds of not just reparations, but also the seeds of the UNIA, which was the organization that Marcus Garvey led, also with his wives, Amy Garvey and Amy Garvey. So we're all throughout and we're all across the political spectrum, all of us always fighting towards equality, towards economic equality, towards suffrage, towards anti-lynching, towards education, also towards reparations. And we see the passage of the 19th Amendment 100 years ago, and this was a fight. It was a fight that we were, as Eva said earlier, we were uninvited to. Think about Ida B. Wells, who was our champion anti-lynching crusader, but also was a suffragist, who was also interested in local politics in both Memphis and Chicago, who, as Eva already said, was uninvited but didn't care. She's going to stand in the face of this discrimination. And what's crazy about it is she's organizing with Black and white women in Chicago fighting for suffrage, and she was uninvited to the parade or the demonstration on Washington at the White House, because the Southern suffragists would be offended and they wouldn't come. And so her white counterparts in the North, and we like to think of the North as being some friendly place, you know, where segregation and discrimination and racism didn't really exist. That was in the South. Well, those Northern suffragists, they co-signed with their white counterparts. Ida B. Wells stood in their face, but also we know that the women who were organized with Delta Sigma Theta sorority and also Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority, they came in and challenged as well, both in print, both legally, publicly. They said, listen, this what's happening is not right, but we're here trying to get suffrage. We're here trying to get the vote. I think about the power of us coming together and organizing and coming in numbers and coming in force. We have people like Josephine St. Pierre Ruffin, who organized here in Boston the seeds of what will become the National Association of Color Women's Clubs, where hundreds of thousands of women across the United States who were already in clubs, who were already in organizations in their local areas, came together to show and force and fight for the interests of Black women like themselves, not just socially, not just in the home, but also politically. That was done here. And then I think about, as you said, I worked at the Mary McLeod Bethune Council House, and Mary McLeod Bethune is a Shiro hero of mine who stood, I think, after the 19th Amendment was passed. She's in her community in Daytona Beach, Florida, and we know she will go on to reach nationally, internationally, but in Daytona Beach, right after the passage of the 19th Amendment, at her school that she started, that she grew into a college. Nobody does that, but a Black woman did that. And she grew that into a college, and she stood after the passage of this amendment, after she gathered her community together and helped, with the help of the Black women around her, to organize and register her community to vote. This is in Northern Florida, which is Klan country. The KKK descended upon her school the night before to enact psychological and violence and the threat of physical violence on her and those who would stand with her. And she literally physically stood in the middle of her school to not be intimidated. And then the next day, she took those folks that she registered and who were willing, and they went to the polls to vote. And then they enacted the same kind of stuff that they do now with the voter disenfranchisement. We're going to have you stand around all day. But they did. They stood for their rights. They knew what they were entitled to, and they made sure that they got those things. I think the idea that Black women across time, we have always been fighting for equality. We've always been fighting for justice. We've always been fighting to be heard, not just for ourselves, but our counterparts, and we've done it together. And we have always made great strides as we've done those things together.
Denise, you have to unmute, but can I just jump in and say, as I stand on the legacy of Mary McLeod Bethune, and it is always a joy and a privilege to be able to say that and just be able to bask in everything that Dr. Phillips just said, because I am her living legacy. So thank you for that.
Thank you. When I heard her relationship to Mary McLeod Bethune and the work, I knew you were going to light up, because I know a little bit about your legacy. You know, Dr. Kenvi, you had said so much. I almost don't know where to start, but I do know that we have DA Rollins here. I know that she has to leave at 7. And I want to first, again, thank you. There's so many things that came up that made me think about you, Rachael, when I think about when she said this woman did what she did with the help of the Black woman around her. And you were propelled to be our first DA, and you did that after how many years of having men in this position. And, you know, I think about what that took, and the Black women in your life, you know, coming from a long-standing family that goes back so many generations. You want to speak a little bit about your success, how you got to your position, and the role that Black women played in propelling you to victory, and any other thing that kind of speaks to your heart, because there's so many. When I think about you, you're the embodiment of some of what we do as Black women, trying to get that person, that idea, in this case, you, across the finish line?
Yeah, I mean, I would just like to piggyback on something the doctor had said earlier. I was profoundly moved maybe like a year or so ago when I realized, which of course all of you already know, but sitting still, I thought, wait, so the civil rights movement propels Black men forward, and the women's suffrage movement, propels white women forward. And here we are as Black and brown women holding both of these mofos up as hard as we can, right? And then pushing them off. I mean, granted, I love that some of us said, no, oh no, I'm coming with you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even though I'm the first wife, or I'm the this or the that. But it is just, we are lost. I watched something today where there was some reporter, Sue, who's from Roxbury. I can't remember her last name. I've been on her show, so anyways, white woman interviewing another white woman through Barbara Lee, talking about Senator Harris, about her gender. Never once in the 8-minute interview did they ever mention melanin, skin tone, bronzer, nothing, right? So nothing about her race at all, because now she's a part of you because it benefits you. So there's just a piece with me that, again, the Amy Coopers of the world and the Karens, we're in a lot of this trouble because of you. And I need you to recognize that this is not, a moment where we're all going to just smile and pretend this didn't happen. Like, that's not where I come from. But my background is, as you know, Mayor, that my grandmother is first generation from Barbados. I grew up with my great grandmother in our house. My mom is the oldest of 11 children. My grandparents got married and had 11 children together and remained together until my grandmother died. And, I think looking at my great grandmother, Keturah, my grandmother, and my mom, I just get a lot of strength from them. And I've seen them be so resilient and hardworking and loving and stern and holding everything together for our family. And again, I am a Black woman, but no buts. I'm a Black woman, hard stop, new paragraph. My father is Irish and my mom is from Barbados. And my father has been very supportive of the fact that his experience is very different than mine. And even though politically we don't necessarily align all the time, I have a deep respect for him as a military veteran and as a person who raised me and taught me and loved me. And so, I think my background has been deeply influential in who I am right now as a district attorney. And then I will just end with, as the oldest of 5 myself, obviously to be a DA, you have to be a lawyer. I tease all of my other electeds where I'm like, well, anyone can be a governor. You have to be a lawyer to be a DA. But of course, you have to be brilliant to do all of the things that all of these, wonderful women around me have done. But there is a requirement that you're a lawyer to be the DA. And in my office started in 1806 was when the Suffolk County DA's office was started. And to the doctor's point, it's funny, one of the first things I did was I found the pictures of every DA. And we had an unveiling. And the first photo, I'm not joking, is like a charcoal sketch, because I don't even think they had photos in 1806. And then it goes all the way up and it's 15 men and me, right? And so it is just so profoundly moving to see that and to be reminded of that every day.
And that's a very good point that you make, as someone who walks through City Hall all the time and constantly reminded of, I am not there, but meaning I am now, but
yeah, you are.
Women are not even.
Women are, and somebody said earlier that we aren't on money. I mean, these sort of subconscious and even frontal lobe conscious things that are happening to us every single day. Attorney General Barr said something a couple months ago where he said, history is written by the winners, right? And so we have to, we are winners. Like, the perseverance we have shown by being as phenomenal as we all are, clearly we are exceptional, but we need to start rewriting history. We need to start having Dr. Phillips come and girl, I'm gonna just become friends with you and have you talk to me over lunch and in the morning before I go to school and work. Because it just fills your heart to hear about all the people before you that were fighting the same fight, and to think, Miss Rivera is, Fannie Lou Hamer, right? But today, right? So it's dope. It's very dope.
And I was very taken back when Dr. Kenvi talked about Anna Douglas and Anna Garvey or Amy Garvey, because we often think about the people that get out in front or are out in front, and not talking about the people that were always in the shadows pushing the man or the cause and never being named. Now, I know all of you well. Stop acting so subdued. Please feel like you can jump in at any time. So I'm going to, in the absence of nothing, I just know you guys are more spirited. So please, I want the spirit to come out. Well, no, I got a question for you. I want to take us out of the historical context for a moment and turn to the present day. And just for a moment, you made your mark as an organizer and as someone who has worked to increase voter turnout in elections across the Commonwealth and across the country. And as you discuss in the chapter you contributed to the recent book entitled Turnout, Mobilizing Voters in an Emergency, I'm wondering if you can talk a little about the particular challenges of making the voices of Black women heard in a time we have a public health crisis, we have a federal government that is purveyors of evil. I guess that's all you could say, that are making it so difficult for us to vote. So let me hear some of your opinions on this.
Yeah, I appreciate it, and also just honestly humbled to be spending this time with all of you this evening and the participants that are there listening to us, and folks in Cambridge as well. But what I would say is, leading up to the recent nomination of Senator Kamala Harris, one of the things that I kept on asking, especially in context of the book, when folks ask me, well, what would be a sign, right?
Mm-hmm.
That the Democratic Party, even if it's not ready to fully accept everything that's happening in the country right now, what would be a sign? And the sign that I said, to folks when asked is very clear: select a Black woman on the ticket. And why? Because ultimately, the nomination and politics in this country is about redistribution of power. That's the American experiment. We're constantly trying to redistribute power in a way that actually is reflective of who we're supposed to be. And yet, after 400 years, somebody always gets a turn, but somehow Black women have to wait.
Yeah.
And it was important in the context of COVID, in the context of what happened in 2018, when even the party did not predict the blue wave happening. And it was driven by Black women and brown women running in places where they weren't expected to win, but they did. Sometimes in the face of opposition from the party, and sometimes in places where it benefited the party, right? So when Black women benefit the party and benefit power, it's great. But when Black women want to benefit equality in the greater culture, then it's problematic, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that's the importance of the appointment, but it's not everything, obviously, right? Because here we are in 2020, and that same Democratic Party also said in COVID that Medicare for all, universal health care, it may not be viable still. Right? So we're still in this pursuit of justice, still in this pursuit of a real social contract, the same one that Black women have been fighting from the very beginning. And as a Afro immigrant, I come to this from a very simple perspective. I've spent my whole life studying your stories and listening. Because having been raised by a Dominican family that wanted to deny our own history, and a Puerto Rican family that wanted to deny our own Blackness, I realized how important it was for me to ally all my work in and it's why for so many years people have asked, well, why aren't you more in front? And it's like, well, because that's not the point. We do this all the time. We say we want to work in solidarity, but then as soon as we get a glimpse, we want to get the front cover. And that's what I think what's the importance of this time, right? Especially in this conversation that we're having with each other here, that's the kind of actionable solidarity that we need to be showing and demonstrating. And there's small actions that we can take, and there's big actions that we can take in that direction. But what's important is that every time you have an opportunity to think, how can I serve Black women, figure it out. And I think that that's something that often for a lot of folks, that's just not the case, right? And I think that in this time that we're living through and that we're going to continue living through, it says a lot that, you know, the Democratic Party, again, for the National Convention next week, has chosen to give Republican Governor John Kasich, who stripped abortion rights in Ohio, 5 minutes on the schedule, and AOC gets 6 minutes. Congressman Pressley's not even invited.
Didn't AOC get 60 seconds?
60 seconds, yes.
Yeah,
So,
correct.
and Congressman Pressley's not even invited. Do we all recall that speech she gave in Atlanta during Senator Warren's race? Anybody that was in that room knew the power that happened in that moment. Imagine if we had a party that actually embraced Black women. We would not be in this moment right now. And I think that we have to continue pushing.
Absolutely. Any thoughts about that? I see heads nodding. Don't hold back. Anybody have any thoughts about that? Reverend Irene?
Yeah, I do. I can't thank you enough. I'm delighted to be at this table with all my sister friends here. I really am. You know, your remarks were just really, I was receiving the whole idea that Ayanna wasn't even invited. AOC gets about 60 seconds here. And I think what bothers me is that we've always been the backbone, whether it's of the church, whether it's of the DNC, whether it's of a women's movement, you know, whether it's America. I mean, it reminds me of this book, this classic Bible I had called This Bridge Called My Back. And I'm reminded of this quote by Anna Julia Cooper. She says that when and where Black women enter, the whole race, and I want to redact it, the entire America or the world enters with us. I think the thing that gets me about it is that as Black women, and I think that my impetus in terms of getting engaged with politics, and I'm so glad that I have someone like Denise, because I always tell her, and you're my number one. Manikka, we never had a chance to meet each other, but you're my number one too, okay? I do bullet voting. And the reason being is because you women, because politics is local, and you women work at the intersections, okay? It's not just about increasing someone's privilege, which is what we've done in terms of the women's movement, whether it's the suffragist movement. It's also about survival and what that means here. So, and it's talking to people. I mean, like I had an issue just recently. The accessibility is really important. I think the problem that bothers me with us always being the backbone here, I think that whether we cognizant or not, I think we're always bleach out of the narrative. I think that we engage in political gentrification by virtue of the fact, like we don't write our narrative, we don't speak up enough. And I'm at this point, because I'm always acting up, like the DNC owe us. See, now I would be doing what I was doing back in the 80s and 90s with ACT UP, because I'd be like, I would do a Hanny Lou Famous here. Hold up now, okay? I know I'm not on the agenda and docket, but I got something to say. Okay, I'm reclaiming, okay? Like Auntie Maxine, I'm reclaiming my time.
Well, I bet Reverend Irene, I will jump in. I want to say that Wilnelia, you know how to organize. I have a lot of respect for her, and I'm thinking that with these powerful women right here in this wonderful room, we're ready to sign on to a letter to say that Ayanna needs to be speaking at the DNC. But Denise, I love you. I want to appreciate you for inviting us all and convening this, okay? And I also, in the, there was sort of a reference made maybe by Kenvi, and we're all sort of feeling it, which is the idea that the invisibility of African-American women and the suffrage movement. I mean, I did call it a celebration, everyone, because it's a milestone, and it is something that a lot of people do celebrate, but it has an underbelly, and that's what we have come to understand. But it also has been whitewashed, and there is this invisibility of Black women in history, not just starting with suffrage, but even before with slavery. You know, and in fact, the impact that enslaved women had in terms of the uprisings and so on, and there were enslaved women who worked on voting rights, if you can believe that. So when we talk about Sojourner Truth. I mean, Kenvi, Dr. Phillips, I mean, she's our historian, thank you, but I've been reading up too, my friend. And I want to say that if people who are watching on Cambridge cable TV want to buy, let's say, one book that they want to read to really get up to the speed, I would say if you can zoom in on this and see this.
Yeah.
You agree, Dr. Phillips? This book is The African American Women in the Struggle for the Vote, 1850, 1920. This historian, she's no longer here with us, but Rosalind Turberg Penn, she documents what Black women, African American women, their impact on the voting rights movement. And we just need to know, I mean, the big takeaway is that we were there. We were there, we were involved, we had impact, we contributed in major ways. And you know, the rest of the story goes, where our story doesn't get told. And it's not that we don't necessarily want to tell it, it's that, you know, the powers that be have no interest in wanting to know that these stories get told. I don't know if the folks in this room may remember, maybe they do, that our convener, Denise Simmons, was the first Black mayor in the state of Massachusetts. Okay, can you imagine? I know we're calling you councilor, but she is mayor. When I served in the legislature, I believe Denise was in the school committee, but soon after was elected. Now I know the election is different in Cambridge, whereby the members of the council will vote for their mayor. But the fact that the members of the council saw fit to do that, and do we even hold Denise up the way we should? You know, I know my running for office and all that stuff was last century for the most part when I served in the legislature. Okay, so I mean it's hard to say, but it's true. So that was in the 1990s that I served in the legislature and came in, and it was kind of it was a bit lonely and isolating, right? Like I said, I was just the seventh Black woman to be elected to the House of Representatives. And there was a small group of us, but you could count the number of Black women in the House on one hand. Yeah. Pretty much, you know what I mean?
Still can, Charlotte. Sorry.
What you say? What you say?
You still can in 2020. I'm sorry. I just want to be to the listeners, but I don't want to.
But now I'm Latinx, Asian women, very diverse. There was a Black caucus because that's all there were in terms of people of color. I mean, there has been progress in that regard. And, you know, we still, like you said, we still got a lot of work to do.
A lot of work to do. Now, I was going to say, Manikka, you've been too quiet.
I know, I'm going to jump in because I want to affirm something that Charlotte said. So I know you as Mayor Simmons, because when I was first elected, Denise was the mayor. And, you know, we have an interesting form of government here in Cambridge, and the mayor chairs the school committee. And if it was not for Denise in my first term, who guided me, who graciously pulled me when I was maybe going in a different direction, maybe I shouldn't have been going in, I really wouldn't be in the position that I am now. And I just think it's really important. I live in the Northeast, but I joke and say I'm a Southern girl in a New England world. And there's this saying, give me my flowers while I'm still living. And I just want to prop up Denise because she deserves it. And it's important for us to do that. And shamefully, it's not done as much. And I'll get on a soapbox. I know that it's sexier to talk about Kamala, and I'm all excited about her. Kamala. And it's sexier to talk about Congress and the Senate. But I think that oftentimes we overlook the people that are just pushing away at it with their head down, serving at the state and the local level, trying to do what is right for our people. And I think that we have to figure out a way to lift those folks up in the conversation as well. So I just need to give you your flowers, Denise.
I have to jump in because I think it would be a disservice, actually, because you're one of the unsung heroes. The only mayor I ever know, and I know that we've had a rotation of mayors, has really been Denise in terms of all the people. So if you're talking about affordable housing, Denise is on that. If you're talking about schools, she's on that. If she's talking about policing in Cambridge, and yes, they police because and profile, because Professor Henry Louis Gates is a classic example of that. And what Denise uncovers is that she's not a mayor just for show. She's about all the people. When we had LGBT issues, and the reason why Cambridge was the first in the state of Massachusetts to issue license is because of you. So you don't need to hide under a bushel, because see, the point is that even if you don't speak about yourself, we have benefited from the work that you have done. And so the thing is this: when it was COVID, okay, COVID came. I wasn't hearing from the president, mayor, because I could say what I want to say, because if anything, you need to court my vote, whoever is the mayor. Who is the mayor of Cambridge now? But in any event, my point is that COVID was happening. Weeks went by. Who did I call? Because it was like, okay, Denise, what's happening? Because see, Denise would have been on the issue. I mean, so the point is that when the city's in a crisis, we had the bomber here. Denise was there. We're scared for our lives around the bomber, the COVID, the civil unrest. So that's a mayor thinking about a person in a holistic way and at those intersections. You will always get my bullet vote, and you too, Manikka, because see, y'all got it right.
Go ahead, Manikka.
I'm just gonna jump in and I'm just gonna say shout out to Simple Siddiqui. She's a sister woman of color, and she's the mayor now, and she's doing a good job. When I was in seminary, I have this question for the panel. Like when I was in seminary, it was the first time that I had the opportunity to really dig deep in the concept of centering Black voice through scholarly discipline called womanist theology. And womanist theology, it's kind of like the cousin to feminism. One of the great theologians, Katie Cannon, really centered the voices of Black women, particularly in the church and really beyond. And so it was interesting for me to give myself permission to center myself in the Black church, which is a deeply sexist institution, to be quite frank and honest about that. I guess my question, when we talk about the female experience, right? Oftentimes there's the conversation in feminism, like there's one female experience. As Black women, we know that's not the case. And so, really building off of what Charlotte said about the stories and the narratives that we tell, I'm just curious, as you walk in your greatness, how are you centering the voices and your story, which is, in my opinion, an act of resistance in and of itself to prop up your leadership and Black leadership and women of color as leaders, because it's something we just don't see very often.
Get you?
So I think my gender is actually the thing that stands out the most in this role, less my race, right? There has been a Black district attorney in Suffolk County before. He was appointed by the governor. He was a Republican, but he's a Black man nonetheless. Where it comes out for me is as a mother and a guardian of my nieces, when we've seen, violence against women and children. And I have tried to make sure that the narrative is completely changed from law enforcement, right? So there is this sort of stagnant, the same stern-faced, just the facts recitation of what happened. And I think it really came out for me centering like the woman issue with Jassy Carrera, which is a beautiful young Cape Verdean woman who was out celebrating her 23rd birthday in 2019, with her friends, looking fabulous, and was kidnapped and ultimately murdered. She was found in the trunk of a car of Lewis Coleman III in Delaware. And when she was brought back, the U.S. attorney ended up taking that case and charged the defendant with a felony murder that is death penalty eligible. But anyways, at the press conference, man after man after man after man after man after man talked. And I was reading comments as it was happening, and everyone was saying, well, what was she wearing? She looked beautiful that evening, and had a dress that if I could fit into, I'd wear every single day, right? But she was, 23 and looked fantastic. And by the way, who cares what she was wearing? And then where were her friends? And they left her. And so all these things, I had my little speech, and I turned that speech over, and I said, what we are not going to do is talk about what Jassy Carrera was wearing. And what we are not going to do is blame her friends. What we are going to do is tell men to stop raping and kidnapping us and killing us. And also tell fathers and men to speak to your sons and friends and say that you aren't going to condone that any longer. So I think that's my gender. But it is also, as we have seen, it's Black women and brown women that are usually the ones that are speaking, right, to our own disadvantage. Because I will be very clear, if I wanted to be DA for the rest of my life, I wouldn't do 99% of the things that I do, because then nobody would fight me. I'd just be like 99% of the other elected officials that I deal with all the time, who don't take a position on anything. And, well, I don't know. No, it's racist, and that's why we're not doing it anymore. Or it's based on you being poor, and that's why my office isn't doing it anymore. And if we're wrong, we admit it, right? But I will say my gender is informed, by my lived experience and the melanin that I am so happy to have every day. But that's how I use it every chance I can get.
Didn't mean to. I just want to say that I appreciate your leadership. And I want to say that because you have a very hard job, and we don't get to say it enough. So I want to say I appreciate you. I appreciate the hard positions that you have stood up on, and you're making many of us, myself included, very proud.
Absolutely. I know the time that you have to leave us is growing near. And so I wanted to allow you to have an opportunity to add anything else to the conversation that you want us to hear, to know, that you want to share, knowing, I have to say, my deepest gratitude for you to take time out of what I know is a life in overdrive every day, to be here, to share your wisdom, as we say, your time and your treasure. So Rachael, is there anything you want to leave us with before you leave us, but also before you do leave? Always know that I can say, I think for all of us, we are here. Consider us your posse, and we're always here to support you.
Thank you very much. And I will just say, one of the things that made me so proud about my campaign was my campaign manager is a Latinx woman. The two co-chairs of my finance committee are Black women. And one of my co-chairs of my transition team is a Black woman. And so I was very deliberate, even at my inauguration. It was like governor, mayor, senator, but I'm like, Natasha Tidwell and my little sister are going to be speaking here. And even, guys, two things I want us to recognize. 2018, we had to wait that long in Massachusetts until employers were legally required for equal pay for women. That's 2018 American AC, right? Like 2018, 2 years ago, this happened. I will also say to Wilnelia, the fact that, no, thank you. My niece is like, do you want a popsicle? Not right now. Thank you. No, I don't. Thank you. So what I will tell you is, I look at our Democratic Party, even in this state, and I will leave you with a story that is very real and true. They did not get involved pre-primary. And in order to run for office, if you run for an office, and I'm teasing people, I'm not talking about like, oh, I'm responsible for that house, this house, and that bush right there. My district is a congressional sized district. It's all of Boston, all of Chelsea, all of Winthrop, all of Revere. When I ran, this was my full-time job. I didn't work. My job was running for office, because I also don't do things unless I'm going to win, right? I am very deliberate about this. Not at 47 do I want to run for something to be like, that was fun. I came in 9th out of 7 people. Not what I'm looking to do with my free time, right? But I will tell you, they did not get involved in the primary. And then post-primary, they were trying to get from me and other like poor people that had just scrunched together to get here, $10,000 each so we could be on their literature. And I remember vividly, I was with Liz Miranda, Representative Miranda, walking on Warren Street in Roxbury. And Liz said, will you look at this? And I hadn't even looked at the materials that we were handing out. It was a sheet with 7 white faces and Ayanna. And I was like, wait a minute, I'm not on the literature and let me tell you who I am. I picked up this phone, I called Gus Bickford, and I said, Gus, riddle me this. Why am I in Roxbury handing out literature for Suzanne Bump? Is she in West Roxbury handing out literature with this face on it? Is she in Charlestown doing that for me? Does Senator Warren, and I love me some Senator Warren, is she having something at her headquarters? And so Gus was like, oh, well, and of course, what did he say? Well, Ayanna's on there. And I said, and I love me some Ayanna, but call her and tell her to meet you on Warren Street. I'm going home, right? So what we need to do is demand, because our leadership doesn't reflect us. They are putting up candidates for governor and other things that I'm like, dude, who sat around and thought of this, right? Look at this, just look at the 8 people right here. Why aren't we telling, and I know she's like, because I can't afford to do it, but the Reverend or Doctor or, Charlotte Golar Richie, why aren't we saying, would you consider being governor? And I will leave you with this right now. There are 7 people on our Commonwealth's Supreme Judicial Court. The governor of our state gets to appoint anyone on our state bench. Of those 7 people, and they make our laws, okay? So it is very important. They are writing opinions that impact people deeply, right? I know the legislature writes laws. They inform them well. Of these 7, 6 are white, 5 are former prosecutors, and there is 1 woman of color who is a dear friend, but is not a person. That is one story of the Black experience. There's not a single Black man. There's not a single Latinx person. There are very few other people represented. And I wrote a letter to the governor recently on my letterhead saying, you have a moment right now, right? If you don't put either a criminal defense lawyer, and I'm a prosecutor, a Black man or a Latinx man, because who are the people that touch our system most often? It is exhausting, guys. I get it. We have to be like diligent and vigilant in making sure we don't let these opportunities pass, because I used to think, why write a letter, do something. No, letters actually matter, because when Governor Baker appoints yet another white man to the SJC, I am going to be plastering this all over the place to say, we warned you, you're not reflective of us, and we have to recognize all of these things matter. So I will leave you with that. I am honored to have met some of you guys and to continue sitting with you, and I'm going to just continue to fight, whether I become DA again, but we need bold leadership, and I'm watching from here. And I appreciate, Charlotte, that really means the world to me, because you're a person I have looked up to for quite some time. And Denise, you went to school with my mom. She's loved you forever, and so have I. So thank you, all of you. I have to run to something else. Be well.
We thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for being here. Manikka, I see you waving your hand. You've got something on your mind. And Eva, you've been quiet. You can't be a bystander. Charlotte, do you want to say something? Because you think about that.
Is that there's a common theme that's kind of emerged, which is relates to the institutions we're affiliated with, and that they don't always do the best by us. And the question is, how do we, in those institutions, whether it's a city council or DA's office or the place where we worship, Manikka, or the school committee or the Democratic Party where I'm active, how do we, working inside those institutions, make them the best that they can be? What do we do? And so I think as women, this is where solidarity and unity come in. They're going to be, I think we should support Wilnelia in her push to have a better program around that. I'm gonna raise it. And I think with the DA, if there are issues that she sees, and when she brought up the issue around the Democratic Party, she talked to the chairman, and I did too. And it was a mistake, and it I don't think will ever happen again. So it was a lesson learned. So how do we do that as Black women, work together to make the change that we want to see in the world?
I want to open it up. How do we make that change? Dr. Phillips, everyone that wants to kind of, well, Nelly, how do we make that change? Phillips?
One of the dilemmas is trying to manage our own time and then trying to make our time coordinate with the other women who are at this table and the other Black women and women of color that we deal with. And I think one of the things that at least has happened in my life over time is, as a single parent, I was so focused on trying to make sure that I was raising two sons that were feminists, that were not going to be walking around like their friends talking about, I got on a beater. It's like, you can wear a beater someplace else, but not in my house.
Mm-hmm.
There are those kinds of issues that we're confronted with. And I think we have to start to think more strategically about our own lives and how we work together. It's not,
Right.
it's not something that happens just organically. I wish it did. There are organic elements, but it's, by the same token, I think it's like anything else that we do with passion and with meaning and with direction. As Rachael has said, I certainly, and Denise, you've heard me say this before, I'm not signing up for something I don't think I can win, quite frankly. If I can't win, I'm not going to do it, or I'm going to figure out how to go around it, or go over it, or under it, or get somebody else to do what I need them to do in my absence. So I think that we really have to think about how we support each other and how we work together. I think about my career with the YWCAs. I've been with YWCAs for over 30 years. And I can't tell you the number of times I literally have sat at the board table and said, there's me and then there's y'all. And you figure out what y'all mean. Because there are opportunities for leadership, there are opportunities to grow and develop, and we have to make sure that we are supporting other Black women, other women of color, and providing that energy and that synergy to make those women, if it's not us, those women, our friends, our sister friends, to succeed. It's a very conscientious choice that we have to make.
Absolutely. And let me just say this very briefly, Reverend Irene. One of the things I think we also can do is remember our history. I live in a house of women. My wife and I have 6 young women that we've all been responsible for. And I even start with my 6-year-old to try to remind her that while we glorify around the advancement of Kamala Harris, and which I hope with the subsequent victory, we're not raising hell here. When you look at a city where women have been voting since 1880, but take you 90 years to get a Black woman on the city council, which was Sandy Graham, or close to 100 years to get a Black woman on school committee, which was Henrietta Alls, and almost 120 years to get a Black woman to be mayor, and subsequently a woman of color follows her. That's something that's important to remember, because we too often glorify what we've done, Cambridge thinks we're all that in a tic tac. And I think it's important to be reminded, look at the history. The truth is right before you. And so and that has to be always put in our children's brains and in our brains and carried forward. So when people start glorifying what I call these small victories, that they put it in proper context.
And Denise, I would love to hear Will talk about that, because the grind that is involved with running a campaign, many of us on here that's done it know that it's not beautiful. It's not sexy. I guess that's my word of the night, sexy.
Okay.
But I would love to hear Will just talk about that as it relates to how do you build the bench in order for us to continue to create the pipeline.
And
I cut off Reverend Monroe, so go ahead. Wilnelia and then Reverend Monroe. Go ahead.
I think it's connected to what everyone is talking about here. Ava, you talked about how do we, we all know that we need to support each other, but it's the how, right? In the strategic manner, right? And understanding what the ecosystem is as well, right? Some of us, based on our realities, have different limitations or opportunities, right? Some of us can stretch this way. Some of us have to stay more focused here. Right. And so I wanted to say that, and then connect it to this question that the Manikka raises, but brings this all together. the truth is that one of the biggest lessons learned of having worked in sort of traditional local state, kind of party politics in Massachusetts after 13 years, having done it from the grassroots in a couple different places, is that for 10 years, I was like, wait a second. If I don't have my own company and we don't build out actual political power with political money, all these structures are great, but they're compromises of power. So what I decided to do, and I think it's something that it's important for anyone that it's connected to building the bench, because let's be clear, I've only been able to build the bench because I decided to take different risks. Instead of joining and being complicit to what I did not agree with, I said no. And I kept on saying no. Nonprofit experience, state government experience, implementation experience, got a planning degree. And I said, you know what? I'm not going to sit at this table because it's not mine. Because every time something happens, they'll remind you it's not your chair. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus my energy. And even though it's crazy and everyone around me is like, I don't know how you're going to do this, but go for it, girl. We got you. Everybody expected it to fail. No one expected it to work, right? And you know what I did? I walked away from politics. So every time someone called me to do something, I said, I can't. I'm doing research. I'm working on something else. And when Ayanna was running and she asked all of the people that she thought would have said yes to her, that said no, I was the only one that could say yes. Because I was running a company already. Right? And I say this because that's what allowed us to do that. And that's what allows other women, but particularly us in this space, to be able to do that over time differently. Institutions are important, right? Because it's the public commons. It's how we manage what we care about, right? So we want to have the insiders, but how do we work together? But also, how do I not degrade you because you may have a limitation, right? Because you might say, you know what, this is as far as I can go, but who's going to take the baton from here, right? And how do we then build those relationships with each other to understand that there might be times that me and you may not align, but that's okay because we have a North Star, because we're nowhere near where we need to be. And most importantly, in terms of building that bench, what I've learned is that, and I think what Ayanna did in reality is that you gotta build your room of your own. To go back to my quarter white feminist here, but sorry, in terms of Virginia Woolf, but it applies, right? You gotta build the room of your own. You gotta have the squad ready, right? Because at the end of the day, when men run, or when other folks that are in power continue to basically stay in power, it's because they call each other. Who calls who when someone's running? How many times you're looking for this staffer or that person and you can't find them? Gotta develop it consistently. And we gotta tell our young people that let's look for types of service that also allows us to grow, not just be in service, but blindly. That tells you when you walk in, tell you to keep your gender and your racial identity in the door, but come and be a loyalist, right? And really embracing that culture and understanding that some of us are gonna take different risks, and that's okay, right? Because there are times when I don't want to do things and people are like surprised, and I'm like, look, I'm not that left, guys. Like, don't get it twisted. I'm actually not. I'm trying to find a nuance here, right? But at the end of the day, I'm not going to knock my activists that are going to go down, that are going to grind, and are going to hold the arc of justice in a way that I probably won't, because I'm going to look for the compromise, because the compromise is progress. But it doesn't mean that them holding the arc is important. So how do we bring us all together in that more constructively, so that we're saying that we're developing this bench, right? So that we're not in this place where it's not just one or two or three or four, right? Because the reality is that locally speaking, whether it's the Gus Bickfords of the world or anyone else, the reality is that they do the same thing over and over again, right? They only want to serve us when it fits us. So I know it was very long-winded, but I had to go there.
No, that was great. As everyone's talking, I just keep thinking about the answer to what we need to do is to look at what we've already done. Like, we Black women have already organized. We've already showed how we can work through our differences. We've already shown how we can galvanize our ideas. Even when you go this way, I go this way, we'll bring our organizations together, we'll bring our crew with us, we'll make our own space. If they don't want us there, we come up with our own organization and have our own political power, have our own voting block, our own financial block. No, we have money, we have power. We can, if you think about the Montgomery bus boycott, if it wasn't for Joanne Robinson, like that thing would not have happened. We think about Ella Baker and SNCC and how she organized the youth. So how are we looking at it? We take the perspective of Black women and our experience and bring it with us, which is oftentimes discounted. But I also have to say, in terms of how we remember what we remember, we were talking about Dr. Penn's book, the book about Black women in voting, and her research in terms of looking at Black women in voting. She was alone with that. And she was alone with that. And she wasn't even able, she had to publish her own research. Her first book, she had to find the funds to do it herself, but she did it herself. And now we lean on her work still because it's just that important. It's just that integral to understanding not just what we've done, but how we can move forward. The roadmap has already been laid. We just have to follow it. And I also have to say, I really appreciate and I want to acknowledge not just that we are looking at Mayor Denise or Councilor Denise, whichever makes you more people, and celebrating you in this moment and celebrating all the other women who are in this conversation. But we do that. And I understand the idea of doing too much celebrating of the small victories, but I think Black women, we do that. We celebrate one another. We protect one another. As soon as we said, Ayanna Pressley wasn't invited to wait, we need to write a letter. And that
That's
was
right.
Immediately, let's do that, okay, so let's do that. And then, even the idea of okay, I was talking, Manikka, you said not only did she bring you in and love on you, she also admonished you when you needed it. So we're doing the whole thing for one another and showing each other where we need to go. I don't think we need to reinvent the wheel. Reinventing that we need to do, but we automatically protect one another, embrace one another, even when we're not. I don't even like her, but let me pull her to the side because she needs to know this, because her losing doesn't make me win. And I think
Right.
that's something that we do often, and we've done it through time. So we just kind of have to continue that and give it to the next generation.
Yeah, I agree with you, Kenvi. What I'm hopeful about is whether Biden and Harris win or not, what we will see that we may have never seen before is a kind of voting mobilizing strategy of Black women. I'm delighted that she's a graduate of an HBCU, but the sororities will come out and they will see this kind of money that we have in terms of backing our candidates. I think that for so long we have been reactionary. We've been voting in a very reactionary kind of stance. But I think by Kamala, running for this position here, I think that it will really bring out a whole bunch of us in ways that we have never, a kind of sisterhood around her, because it's very important that whether she wins or not, I want her to win, but we will really understand our strength. And when I say I understand our strength, I was part of the youth program for the Shirley Chisholm. I got to show this book because this really dates me. This is when these books were 95 cents. So that tells you how back in the day this is. But I remember she had a profound impact. Al Sharpton was the youth director for the campaign and got all of us kids from Brooklyn, working for Shirley. So the interesting thing is the district was really a poor district. I mean, Charlotte, you can vouch for me. I grew up in the projects. But what I learned from Shirley Chisholm, and other than being unbought and unbossed, was that, wow, we poor project people, okay, can put this woman in office to speak for us. And what I walked away understanding is this, that the power of the people is far greater than the people in power. And Shirley taught me that, this project girl, okay, and nobody think about the folks in the project because they don't want us to vote anyway, which they want us, in many ways participate in what I call this voting gentrification or political gentrification. But it was like, Wow. And even though I couldn't vote, I couldn't wait until I turned 18 to vote because it's having people in the areas that you grow up to touch you. That's why I say you touched me, Denise. You touched me, Manikka, because Shirley Chisholm has also touched me. And I think we will see a really sea change in this election.
Yeah, we have a statement, not such a question, but from Priscilla Flint Banks. She writes, saying, "Maybe we need to start, when talking about building this bench, maybe we need to start training our own. Why don't we have our Black girls emerge, or some of those programs whose purpose is to develop that bench, but start it early, because I know there are programs, and I know emerge in the pipeline for change, and a lot of those programs seek to find Black women. But one of the things that we might want to think about is, being very intentional about that, showing our young women that they can and should do it, and give them ways to do that. I mean, Ever and I work on the GOLD program, Girls Only Leadership Development. We don't talk much about running for public office, but we certainly could tune it up a little bit and start talking a little bit more about community involvement. And if you're not running for office, then work for someone that wants to run for office, and those kinds of things. Well, someone also asked Charlotte, they wanted to see the name of that book. It came up and went away so fast. So before we leave, we got to see your book again. Someone else, Katrina Huff, writes, I think it's important to celebrate each other because no one is celebrating us. And we talked a little bit about that. We have to celebrate ourselves. One of the things my mother always told me, she says, if no one's clapping for you, clap for yourself, because you've got to keep yourself motivated. And it wasn't about self-aggrandizement. It was it's going to be hard for you. I'm going to tell you that now. So get into the habit of being able to tell yourself a good word and fortify yourself so you can keep going. Other thoughts, folks?
I just want to offer some thoughts on the piece that Priscilla shared about teaching, sort of at a younger age, and I think the emerge model is one, right? But I think that a lot of the best models I've seen across the country are actually ones that are led by Black women, but they can't find the funding to fund them. Look, right. These ideas they all exist. It's whether can we find the resources to identify, to then align with the potential, right? That's already there, right? So
Right.
Jessica Bird, right? She runs 3-point strategies. I would say she's the Wilnelia of Georgia, right? Best way to put it, right? How has she been able to do that? Same way, decided 6 years ago that she had to, left Emily's list and decided to create her own shop. There's a theme here of economic prosperity and mobility. There's only so much an institution is going to concede power to us before
That's right.
we have to resource it ourselves, right? And one of the patterns that we've also seen across the country when Black women and brown women to some degree, but less so, run for office locally or for Congress, they're winning with much less money than their counterparts, right? And they're winning with staff that are not part of the infrastructure because they got to bring people in, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I say that as examples because I think a lot of times we think through these ideas and we think they're absent, but it's just that the resources to fund them aren't there. And we got to think about what are the ways in which we are using the economic resources that we have to fund these things outside of government.
And in the chat here, someone even writes, talk about giving financial support of female candidates. How do we get people to give more to female candidates? You are absolutely right. It doesn't take much to go to look on OCPF, Office of Campaign and Political Finance, see who's giving. And one thing I found very interesting, you can look at somebody, we're just going to call them Mary Sue, and Mary Sue gives $500 to the guy and gives the woman $250. And how do we change that scenario? Because as I say to people when I'm on the trail, the literature all costs the same. They don't give discounts for women. They don't give discounts for Black folks. That literature all costs the same. So if you're going to give $5, and I've been close now, and I can't speak for Charlotte or for Manikka, you kind of call people out a little bit. I noticed that you gave so such and such and such and such, and I'm hoping that I can get the same from you. And it's a hard question. And you know, there's a book that was written that says women don't ask, and you know, and it's true. It's hard to kind of beg for yourself, but we do have to get better. One, supporting our candidates and giving more, and then asking other people to give more. But others can weigh in on this as well. Thoughts, burning ideas.
I'm thinking about, oh man, her name escapes me. Oh, Congressman from DC, Eleanor Holmes Norton, when she was several years ago when they recorded her making a call for contributions, which is standard practice, you know, in Congress. But she was like set out like she was, you know, some leech who was out begging for money. Like she literally, it was a spin. And I have to think that it has something to do with her race and her gender, where it's like, oh, look at how, you know, underhanded she's being, or how, you know, whatever, to make it look like this is not the regular practice. This is how this works. And she was made to look like something was wrong with her. And I wonder, as I'm talking to you, you know, women who are ran in office or been in office, who are in office, like, and in campaigns, like what kinds of opposition do you come up against? I know looking and working in archives, I see for those collections that we're privileged to have and have access to, we see oftentimes crazy hate notes and hate mail and threats and that type of thing. And I would hate to walk away like not understanding like the full extent of like what we're up against when you take these stands and when you take office.
I'll jump in and I'll just say to that idea, I ran for 3 terms for the state rep. I served in the legislature, and this was, like I said, last century, before social media and all of that stuff. And it had its drawbacks, because certainly with social media platforms, you can communicate with people. We can do these virtual meetings, and it's just amazing what technology has done to enhance communication. But it also has, you know, brought up some challenges in terms of the mean-spiritedness in some of the stuff that goes on. When I ran for mayor later, 2013, it was a whole different scenario. And I actually don't even really get into the social media as deeply as, because I just feel that that stuff is so negative, it starts to get to your core. So that's a tricky thing around that. I think if you fear all of the reasons that could be out there to not run for office, you won't do it. And the benefits, I will tell you, far outweigh the negative. I think I can say that, even though I am not in this era right now, running now, but I would say the benefits outweigh, the rewards outweigh. Denise I think that's why she stayed in it as long as she has, because it's not, I guess it was Reverend Irene talking about how much she appreciates Denise Simmons' commitment. I think the giving and helping people, I really feel that that comes back to you, you know, manyfold.
Tenfold. Well, I've been given the 5-minute warning. We have a question out there. Joyce Coffin asked, you know, she was wondering, what can white women do to support Black women? We have 5 minutes left. So I want to leave it to our panelists to give you can answer that question, or to give us your 1-minute thought. Is there something that you didn't say that we weren't able to get out that you'd like to say, other than me saying to you, my very humble thanks to each of you. So I open up the floor to each of you to give your 1-minute close or reopener.
I'll go first and also close in and answer the question. But what I would say is that there's, you know, probably about, you know, hopefully, wish there were more, but there's at least, you know, 7 to, you know, probably 8 to 10 Black women right now that are running locally in down ballot races, you know, and that's probably where you can maximize your impact, right? A lot of times we think about Congress, right? But, you know, a maximum donation is 1,000, you know, obviously anything as little as, you know, as what you can. But the reality is that down ballot races is where you maximize your impact. And if you haven't had a chance to do that, if you want to follow up with me, Denise knows how to get a hold of me. Manikka does as well. So we do a lot of political research on this as well. So if there's other Black candidates that you want to know from across the country, but focus on women, to be honest. To be clear, it's Black women and women of color. And what I would say, just in the sort of my last comments as we are wrapping up today, is that we are allowed to both celebrate our joys and our pains. And in moments like this and spaces like this are important for us to remind ourselves that we can, right? But I think most importantly for those of you that are listening is that, I wouldn't be me, the organizer that I am, if I didn't say this, but from the places that you're sitting in Cambridge, this is an all hands on deck moment in our country. And trust those
So
Black.
I don't.
Sorry, but I'm going to stop right there.
We
but
had 1 minute left, and I think, did that close it?
I think Denise freezed on us, but I'll keep it going. Like, we're having technical issues. Denise is freezing and I'm in the dark, but we're going to keep this going. So Charlotte, can you give us your last minute? What do you have for us?
Yeah, I'll just say people wanted to know this book again. And this, I would say, is a book that not just Black women need to read, but I think white women need to read as well. And so this history is not just Black history. This is our history as Americans, African-American women in the struggle for the vote, 1850 to 1920. You can get it on Amazon. Thank you.
Dr. Phillips, what you have for us?
All I would say is that I'm honored to be with you all, and there are all these wonderful leaders and women with names that are far above us and high above us, as they should be. But the importance of the collective, the importance of the individual is not lost on me. I think about heroes and sheroes in my life, and I go directly to my mother and my grandmother, and I go, directly to how I transfer that to nephews and cousins that come behind me. And so the importance of the individual acts, definitely go out and vote. We'll just say this is an all hands on deck moment. So don't mistake, your individualness for lacking power, because you do have power and we need to exercise it.
The good Reverend, what do you have for us?
Okay, so for white women, this is what I want to say to you here. Listen, don't be like the walls of mom, because then that becomes political gentrification. To you sisters, I think you need to lift as you climb. We're better together than really separate. But this much I learned, and I'm being redundant, but that's part of being a minister. Denise, whatever you always ask, I give. And for all the other ones who think it's also good to take a minister with you, because we have no problem asking, but we have to massage that muscle. We really do in terms of women. We have to massage that. But I just want to leave you with this. If you want to get, this administration that we have out of office, we got to put aside our differences, our pettiness, and that we really have to unite. And again, like I learned from Shirley Chisholm as a girl growing up in the projects, the power of the people is greater than the people in power. God bless you.
Eva.
Everything Reverend Irene said, and then, one of the things that I really want white women to understand is that we don't always have the same academic pedigrees. We don't always have the same professional experience, but that doesn't mean that we're not smart. And that doesn't mean that we can't figure out how to do things and make things work. So as opposed to coming in and bringing your expertise and trying to tell us how to do things, you need to listen to us.
All right now. All right, Denise.
First of all, thank you to everyone. Thank you so much. Manikka, I'm gonna let you have the last word because I want you to do your little commercial, but I want to leave you with something, Reverend Irene, you kind of stole it from me, but I'm going to say it anyways. But the words of Anna Julia Cooper, and she says, only the Black woman can say when and where I enter, in the quiet, undisputed dignity of my womanhood, without violence and without suing or special patronage. Then and there, the whole race enters with me. Thanks so much for being with us, Manikka.
Yeah. Thank you. And I feel lifted, even in the dark, as I sit here in the dark, I feel lifted because of the power that has been centered in this moment. And I'm so excited. Denise and I, we are co-conspirators with a program that we run, Black Cambridge and COVID-19. And our next series that we're going to have will be on September 13th, and it is a very relevant conversation. We're going to have an intermunicipal conversation with other school committee leaders around the decisions that we all have to make regarding how we bring our young people back to a place of education in the context of COVID-19. It has been quite the experience serving in this role, in this moment. And for once, I think the public probably gets the importance of who you elect to a school committee role. It's not just some other elected body. It matters just as much as the city council, as the Congress, as the state rep. And I think people are now starting to understand that with the decisions that these bodies are having to make. So thank you to everyone. Tune into that show, same place, same time. Thank you, CCTV. And I just want to end by saying Black women rock. And thank you for tuning in today. And thank you to our panel. Be blessed. Bye-bye.
Good night, everyone.
Bye.
And thank you for joining us.
Thank you.